Hello, and welcome to Public Law 2022. I'm Lindsay Stirton, and I'll be teaching you on the module, and I'll be convening the MA in Public Law. Public Law is team taught, so you will have other lecturers for other parts of the module. All of this will become clear, but for now, welcome. I'm really looking forward to meeting you and to the many interesting discussions that I expect we will be having shortly. If you're new to the study of law, as most of you will be, you might be wondering, what is public law? I'm not too keen on definitions as a rule. I think they often end up confusing more than helping. This is because it often turns out that the way that people use a term in practice is too varied to fit the definition. And it turns out that public law is no different. But just this once, let me start with a definition. I'm going to define public law as the law of the state, in the same way that corporate law is the law of corporations in the business sector. This is a controversial definition because one of the leading jurists of the 19th and early 20th century, F.W. Maitland, famously argued that English law did not have a concept of the state. Now, no public lawyer should disagree with Maitland lightly, but in my defence, he was not suggesting that this was a good thing. Rather, he was suggesting that one of the failings of English law was that rather than dealing with the reality of the state, it relied on fictions, such as the fiction of the crown as distinct from the person of the monarch. But if we see public law as the law of the state, then a rather expansive area of law comes into focus. First and foremost, it covers the internal composition of the state, its different organs and how they relate to each other in law, how the state makes decisions, and any duties it owes to those affected by those decisions, how far the state's power extends over individuals, and so on. To illustrate, let's take a story dominating the headlines when I made this video, the appointment of Liz Truss as Prime Minister, replacing Boris Johnson. Now, you may have views about whether this is a good thing, whether or not Liz Truss will make a good Prime Minister. But have you ever thought about how this process is governed by the law of the state? How is a Prime Minister chosen? What functions does she have in law? What would happen, for example, if Liz Truss fell ill for a period and was unable to perform her functions? How and by whom can she be replaced if people don't like how she performs? If you were to look at the Constitution of Jamaica, you would see such matters answered very clearly in sections 70 and 71 of the Constitution. You would learn that the Governor-General appoints as Prime Minister the member of the House of Representatives who, in his judgment, is best able to command the confidence of a majority of the members of that House. The Prime Minister, you would learn, is a member of the Cabinet, and is required as far as practical to attend and preside at all cabinet meetings. She has the responsibility of advising the Governor-General on certain matters, such as the appointment of other ministers. As you will soon learn, in English law, these important constitutional matters are not written down in a codified constitution as they were in Jamaica. In fact, they are not even law in the sense of being the general law of the land. They are what we will call conventions, which can be distinguished from law in the narrow sense because they are not enforced by the courts. But in a broader sense, they comprise an important part of our public law, the law of the state, and without them there would be no Prime Minister, no cabinet, no regular procedure for appointment or replacement, and no prime ministerial powers or duties. As another public lawyer, J.D.B. Mitchell, said, inevitably public law exists in some form wherever the machinery of government operates. So let me say something more about the nature and character of public law and about the way the module is taught. The first thing to say about public law is that, inevitably, given its subject matter, there is a lot of politics involved in the subject. This is what first drew me to the subject, and I know that one of the things students really like about this module is that they learn about politics while studying it. But I also expect that some of you have never before taken an interest in politics or public affairs, and that for at least some among you, learning more about politics and government won't endear you to the subject. If this describes you, that's absolutely fine. We all have our likes and dislikes, and we encourage you to form and develop your own tastes and preferences, even if you end up counting the subject I love amongst your dislikes. But public law is the law of the state and is inherently about politics just as much as the law of corporations is inherently connected with corporate affairs. It should go without saying that we don't approach the subject from any party political point of view, and that all opinions and perspectives are welcome on this module, provided that they are backed up with evidence and argument. And unless you are particularly good at guessing, you won't know which, if any, of the political parties I or any of the other lecturers support, although you may hear our views on some certain specific issues relevant to the module. Think of it like this. If you want to be an effective family lawyer, you would have to know something of the way families operate, the dynamics of how parents relate to their children and vice versa, the commitments that couples want to make to each other over the long term, and what happens when married or cohabiting couples fall out. The difference, I suppose, is that we all have some kind of experience of family life, broadly defined, before we come to study law, whereas very few of us have prior experience of politics and government. In contrast with family law, public law can often seem remote and abstract at first. So, yes, public law can at times be a complicated and confusing subject. This is partly because, as I just said, its subject matter can be unfamiliar, and also because of the absence of an authoritative written text as the core of the law of the state. It should also be said that due to Brexit and all other recent upheavals, we are learning public law at a time of constitutional flux. Two influential commentators, Andrew Blake and Peter Hennessy, talk about the melting of the Constitution to describe the phenomenon of the loss of form and effectiveness of important parts of the law of the state in the present day. We'll get into all of that, but I want to say that it's not my aim to reduce public law to a simple set of propositions that can be memorized and applied. I think that would do you a great disservice, because true understanding comes from wrestling with this complexity and with this ambiguity and flux, rather than trying to deny it. There is a story about a woman who attended a lecture given by the physicist Enrico Fermi. Afterward, she commented, "Before I came here, I was confused about this subject. Having listened to your lecture, I'm still confused, but on a higher level." That, I think, is a reasonable aim, to be confused but on a higher level. And to do that, you will have to learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable, but I will support you throughout that process of growth. In seminars, you will undertake role plays or simulations in which you have to act out a scenario as a constitutional actor, as the Prime Minister or the Home Secretary or the Leader of the Opposition. And in your reading lists, which are available online, you will be guided to works of politics as well as law that will explain the political dynamics as well as the legal rules. You will be directed to YouTube videos, like this one that I have made specially with extra mini lectures to enhance the module. For every topic, you will be given a briefing note that will tell you the essentials of what you need to get started in your study of the topic. From there you can start your work and just tackle lectures and seminars, as well as your own independent reading on the topic. Speaking of readings, I would like to recommend a couple of books from Oxford University Press's Very Short Introduction series, which I recommend that you read before the new university year starts in a couple of weeks. It says of the Very Short Introduction series, they are introductions for anyone wanting a stimulating and accessible way into a new subject. They are short and not too taxing for holiday reading, so I do recommend that you get hold of these and read them before the module starts. The first one in the series that I recommend is by Martin Laughlin and is called The British Constitution, A Very Short Introduction. Martin Laughlin is a very well-known British writer on constitutional law. He describes his book as narrative history, and it's just that. It takes the reader through the leading ideas and doctrines of the Constitution, from the memory of the Anglo-Saxon era and the centralising effects of Norman rule that were important to the way people thought about the Constitution in the Middle Ages, through to the significant constitutional changes made by the turn of the millennium Labour government. It will introduce you to the major events that have shaped the British Constitution over 1,000 years, as well as the key thinkers, people like William Blackstone, Albert Dicey and Walter Bagehot, whose ideas have shaped thinking on the Constitution. We will learn about these people and events in the course of things, but reading the very short introduction to the British Constitution will get you off to a great start. The other book I recommend in the same series is British Politics, A Very Short Introduction by Tony Wright. Tony Wright was a lecturer in politics before serving as an MP for nearly 20 years until 2010. And as an MP, he became chairman of the Public Administration Select Committee. And so he has great experience both as a theorist of politics as well as a practitioner. I like the book especially because it has an institutional perspective which goes well with the legal study of the Constitution. The book starts and ends with a discussion of the Constitution, and the latest edition is up to date. The last few years have been unusual ones in British politics, with Brexit in particular being an issue which challenges many of our conventional assumptions about politics and the Constitution. So I recommend that you read these two books before the beginning of the term. Tony Wright's book on British politics I would particularly recommend if British politics is an unfamiliar topic to you. Perhaps because you are an overseas student coming to study in the United Kingdom for the first time. For those of you with a bit more time on your hands, I recommend that you take a look at Linda Colley's book, The Gun, the Ship and the Pen. This is a remarkable book which looks at the spread of written constitutions around the world since the 18th century. And she makes a really interesting argument. The spread of constitutionalism since the 18th century was bound up with the projection of state power, and especially military power. She argues that new forms of warfare emerged that were more costly in terms of blood and treasure, and as they did so, written constitutions proved a way of underpinning the power of the state to levy taxes and conscript soldiers. And as a quid pro quo of this, the male population of the countries adopting these constitutions were granted political rights, the right to vote, the rights of citizenship, as a way of motivating the necessary financial and personal sacrifices that this all entailed. Interestingly, she sees Britain, with its famously unwritten constitution, as at best a partial exception to this trend. After all, written constitutions were enacted for many parts of the British Empire, with the exception of the home nations. If you're interested in public law at all, I think you will really find this a page-turner, and it is far the best book I've ever read that makes explicit link between public law and other areas of human endeavour. Let me finish by saying just how much I'm looking forward to meeting you and to teaching you on the module. Our Constitution, as I've indicated, is in a period of quite dramatic change, and it's a really exciting time to be teaching public law and to be learning it for the first time. As I've said, this will be a challenging module, and I cannot always promise easy answers to questions about public law. What I will try to do is help you to ask better questions. To use the famous trinity of the first Director General of the BBC, Lord Reith, I hope you will be informed, educated and entertained as you study the module. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.